Well, good evening and welcome to this live stream event on the 18th of January 2022. Martin North here from Digital Finance Analytics. Great to have you with us. And we're going to have a really interesting conversation tonight about property. And Evan, who's with me, and I were just talking about the fact that who are we going to upset? And the answer is we're going to upset all the same people because both of us believe the same things about quite a lot of things with property. So that'll be an interesting conversation, I think, tonight. And obviously we'll go through our normal process of asking questions and getting feedback from the audience. Just before I start, as I always do, just remind you that this isn't specific financial or legal advice. This is just a general conversation. Do please play nice in the chat room. The stream is moderated and so no racial slurs. As at the 18th of January 2022, if you want to get my attention or if you want to ask a question, use @WalkTheWorld. That'll make sure that I see the question that you ask. I've also enabled Super Chat, and that means that if you want to get your question to the top of the list, you can use Super Chat to do that, or indeed, if you'd like to make a contribution to the running of the show. We don't do this for profit, we do this because we think it's really important, so if you'd like to make a contribution, always gratefully received. Right, well that's all the preamble out the way, so Evan, I'm just about to bring you in. Hello.
Good evening, Martin. Good to see you, sir.
And how are you doing? Great to have you on the show. We had a few technical jiggery pokeries to sort out before we got there, but we got there.
Well, you know, that always happens, right? Bill Gates can't do a promo without messing up the tech demo, so the rest of us shouldn't feel bad about it.
It is a bit like that, isn't it? But anyway, thank you very much for coming on and spending some of your Tuesday evening with us. You and I made a show last year, which actually was very well received. It got a lot of feedback because it was a very honest conversation about property, right? And you know, honest and property don't necessarily go in the same sentence that often, does it?
Sadly, no. I think you and I have already discussed which villains we're going to pile onto, but we'll get to that in due course.
Exactly right. Now, I think to start the conversation, it would be good for those people who perhaps haven't caught up with what you're up to sort of come in. And I thought I might just share this particular article. This is actually from the Sydney Morning Herald about 3 years ago. The accidental real estate agent, right? The tech entrepreneur who started his own agency. It almost sounded from that article as though you fell into it. But what's the real story?
Yeah, well, it was a bit more deliberate than that. So yeah, look, my background's in tech startups, right? I put the first Australian tech company on the NASDAQ 23 years ago now. So a long time ago. You know, that got to 14 billion in market cap. So that was real money in those days. Retired and came home to Australia, and like many people do, tried to put some of what I had earned into property. And so fast forward to about 15 years, and it was just really frustrating for me that I couldn't get the same level of service from anyone in the real estate industry that I was used to getting from, I guess, other professional services, you know, lawyers, accountants, tax advisors, others. And my business partner, Anthony Cohen, Anthony was a senior partner at KPMG for 28 years. We talked about it and we tried to find out why that was. And it turns out we discovered, because we didn't know anything about this stuff, that as property investors, the real estate industry generally has surprisingly little care for you. Property management is sort of the poor cousin in most real estate agencies to the sales function. And, you know, if you're a good property investor and you've bought well, and that's really the key, is buying well, you hope to never sell, right? You'll let that value appreciate, leverage off that and buy another one. So a real estate sales agent is no use to you and you're no use to them. And as a consequence, they treat you surprisingly badly. So once we discovered all of that, we thought it was time that somebody did something about that. And so we decided to, I guess, take some of the sort of tech disruptor, to use the current language, skills that have come in my past, certainly. And, you know, Anthony and I had talked about, let's do something in business together. Let's find an industry that, you know, that's swimming in cash, hasn't had a new idea for 50 years and whose customers hate it. And the real estate industry stuck all three hands in the air. So we started out building a property management company, and that's now going very well, principally based in Melbourne, though we've just opened in Brisbane and we will be in New South Wales shortly. But we now manage about 4,300 rental properties for our clients. So that's pretty quick growth in the last 5 years. But then we started analysing the investment performance of the properties that we were managing for our clients. And the shocking truth was that on average, their capital growth rate was 280 basis points, 2.8% below the housing market average. So, while our clients pay us, $8 or $9 million a year to manage their properties, and I'm happy to say we do that extremely well. We're about 60 customer satisfaction points, NPS points ahead of the industry average, so we do a great job with that. They're losing $80 or $90 million in lost capital growth. So because they bought the wrong properties, even versus the average in the housing market, let alone a top quartile or top decile, those self-same clients are losing 10 times as much. So it became clear to us that if our mission was really to help property investors, then we really had to help them buy well as manage those properties well. Because, the difference between buying well and not buying well is typically $500,000 over the next 10 years in terms of the value of the property. So now we're quite a large buyer's advisory service as well. And we've got the only data science team in the industry. So we try and marry the traditional skills of a high quality buyer's advisor or buyer's advocate, as they're often called, who, have been buying thousands of properties for the last 10 or 20 years with, cutting edge data science to make sure that we've got the best predictive view about which properties are likely to have the strongest capital growth. So if you marry a bit of art and science, I think you can do that. So that's what we're now doing. So it sort of, I guess, trades off my background as a tech entrepreneur and as a property investor.
And interesting name, LongView. I think that tells us something really, really important about the way you think about this proposition.
Look, 100%. I mean, property is a long game. Look, there are people who can make money in property in short-term flips and things. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I've seen some people be successful doing that. I've seen a lot of people not be successful. But I think, the vast majority of the wealth that's been created in property in this country, and there has been a vast amount of wealth created by property in this country, has been made by people who've bought high-quality property and held it for a long time. And so it is a multi-decade proposition. We sometimes talk about our client base as we're trying to either help create or support intergenerational property families, because that's actually what happens if things go well. People can build wealth for themselves and then ultimately their families if they buy good property and approach it with a long-term point of view. So, and everything, I guess, about the traditional real estate industry and everything about the property development industry is all short-term. And that was exactly what we didn't want to be. I've just belled the cat on a couple of the villains you and I discussed, Martin. We'll get stuck into the banks later. But so I hope our name reflects the approach that we try and take, which is to look at things over the longer term.
And, one of the most intriguing aspects of property in Australia is the rise of the high-rise. And, we've got big developers who are, frankly, flogging very cheaply built high-rise property all over the place. There are a lot of property investors who've actually bought that dream or nightmare, depending on how you look at it, right? So what's your take on the difference between, the high-rise stuff that's going out there compared with perhaps your meat and potato, house in the, because it's a very different proposition, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, I think you've got to step back and say, why are people investing in property? Are they investing to get income from it, from rental yield, or are they investing to get growth in value through capital growth? And, it is possible to generate a modest amount of passive income through property, and certainly over the longer term, as the value goes up and the rents go up, that increases. But the Australian market, almost more than any other market in the world, because there is a trade-off between capital growth and income, is a capital growth-oriented market. And so if you ask yourself what drives capital growth, I go back to the oldest but often forgotten maxim of property investment. Land appreciates, buildings depreciate. It couldn't be simpler, but it's fundamentally true. Now, How quickly the land appreciates depends on a range of factors, most importantly where it's located and other critical factors like population growth. But nevertheless, a high-rise apartment building is virtually all building content and virtually no land content, and the value of that building goes down. It's like a new car that it's worth 20% less when you drive it out of the lot. That lovely new European kitchen is worth less 5 years from now than it is today because it's no longer lovely and new and somebody else has got a better one. So, you know, a high-rise apartment tower, by and large, the money you put into the building will go down in value. The money you put into the land will go up in value. Almost all your money's in a building. So even if it was well built, and many of them aren't, even if you didn't have a blowout in costs with, you know, with strata costs and with building defects and with all the other factors, just the fundamentals don't make much sense as an investment if you're investing for capital growth. So, you know, we've I don't think we've ever advised a client to buy a high-rise apartment as an investment. You know, there are certain clients for whom that might be the right home. I accept that, and obviously that might be a different question for them, but it's never a good investment. We've been saying that for a long time. The last couple of years, it's turned out to be an even more catastrophically bad investment, unfortunately, than perhaps it was previously. And yeah, there's not much happy to say about new build high-rise apartments as a property investment.
And interestingly, I've spoken to quite a few people who bought into the high-rise sector, not necessarily just yesterday, but, you know, even a few years ago. Yeah. And somehow they've got this view that, well, things will go right. You know, things will go right because migration will actually save us, or you know, yeah, future demand will save us. And I often say, well, you know, a dog is a dog is a dog, right? Once you're in the wrong property.
Unfortunately, that's right.
Yeah.
You know, and Martin, look, I see this both anecdotally and in the data, right? You know, we've got 4,500 clients, and so sadly, quite a lot of those clients bought themselves those types of high-rise new build apartments often a decade ago or more. And in some cases, they're still underwater, you know, when had they bought wisely, they would have in fact doubled their money or more in a higher land content property. So it's really heartbreaking. And then, you know, our data science team has looked at literally the price of every single property for the last 50 years. And we've looked at the roughly 2% of all property transactions where a property is sold for less than what the property was bought for. And guess what? 90% or 95% of those properties, there's a few others in regional areas where the microeconomic factors go up and down, but the overwhelming majority of properties that have ever been sold at a loss are new build apartments.
Yeah, funny that. And yet the dream is still being spruiked. And interestingly, of course, a lot of those high-rise apartments were effectively sold off the plan, quite often to foreign investors who perhaps didn't understand some of the fundamentals that we're talking about here. So I quite often see some of those people who are literally trapped, right, into a property that they bought some time ago. It's not performing. Often they can't even let it. And they really are very much cannon fodder for the developers who really are only thinking very short term, and they just want to turn the deal over. And let's not let the sales agents off the hook here, right? I mean, you know, in a normal real estate sales environment, if you're selling your home, you know, depending on the value of the home, the real estate agent will charge, you know, maybe between typically 1% and 2%. The developers will often pay the real estate sales agents 5 or 6% to sell these things, right? So they try and give huge incentive to the real estate sales agents to make more money selling these rubbish new build apartments, and of course that's what those agents then go and do. So you have both the developers and the sales agents all out there telling people this is a wonderful investment, and there's really no one who's saying they're not, apart of course from you and I and a few other honest souls. Yes, and it is interesting because, you know, if you think about the way that the industry actually works, there are a whole bunches of stakeholders with interests that are sort of aligned, but not necessarily in the interests of those people who are purchasing the properties. And you know, if you put in a line the developers and the agents and, you know, whether the banks there as well, right? And I suppose government too. They're all
government too, particularly because the governments, you know, are so reliant on housing construction and property development as a key driver of the economy. So a lot of government policy is there to aid and abet the property development process for good reasons. They want to keep people in jobs and keep the economy growing, but they become silent partners in this as well.
Well, and of course then they start making interesting excuses as to why properties are unaffordable, right? And they then blame supply, which happens to be a state issue rather than the big question. But the other side of the coin is the debt issue, right? Because you know, I suspect that quite a few of your property investors are quite highly leveraged.
Well, that's right. And if you have bought well, if you've bought a good property, there's almost no chance that property will go down in value. But if you've bought badly, there's every chance that property will go down in value. And as you say, if you're leveraged, so whatever the increase or decrease in value of the property is multiplied several times over. I mean, if you've got an 80% mortgage, then the increase or decrease in value of the property is effectively multiplied 5 times over in terms of its impact on the value of your equity. That's amazing when it's going up. It's catastrophic when it's going down.
Absolutely. Well, there's a bunch of questions in the chat. I just wanted to bring this one in. Cross Stitch Ange said, I'm interested in knowing if it's worth investing in some staging for rentals inspections to get the right type of renter in a home, because that's an interesting question too, isn't it? How do you get the right tenant?
Yeah, look, we've looked at staging. It's generally hard to justify the costs of staging. What we do, though, sometimes is virtual staging. So we can have all of that done in a computer-generated way, just so that the home doesn't look empty in the photographs. Obviously, when people arrive at a rental, they usually are empty, unless it's a furnished rental. But you've got them there then, and they can then, you know, try and evaluate the property. You know, some higher end properties, it arguably is worth staging, but just the cost and hassle of staging, if you sort of do the math on that, if it's only going to be a 12 or 24 month lease, it usually doesn't make enough difference to the rent you're going to receive to justify the time and cost, unfortunately. Different, obviously, when you're selling a home. Yeah,
that's very interesting, and I think you know, the difference between renting and buying is quite significant. What about this other question, and that is, you know, the media's been showing hundreds and hundreds of people turning outside of a particular property to try and rent it, right? And, you know, it's been on the front pages in the last week or so. What's going on there, and is that, you know, the general story, or is that just a few odd ones?
Well, I think, you know, a lot of what is going on is these very and these are actually once-in-a-lifetime impacts in some ways of the pandemic. You know, the scale of the movement from the cities, and particularly the inner cities, to the lifestyle precincts, you know, within an hour or two of the city, or even further out, you know, up and down the coasts, is unprecedented. And unfortunately, what that means is, because a lot of those regional markets are relatively small markets, you know, if 2% of people move out of Melbourne and go to the surrounding regions, that might be a 20 or 30 or 40% increase in the number of people suddenly looking to rent or buy, for that matter. And so, whereas the drop in Melbourne overall is not very much. So you don't see much of the downside of that cycle. You see it mainly, again, surprise, surprise, in both the rental and sale prices of high-rise apartments, many of which are now empty. But it means there's a massive over demand for a limited supply of properties in these locations that have suddenly become much, much more attractive to people in, you know, out of health and out of, you know, the work from home revolution, or particularly what we call the hybrid work from home revolution, where people change the equation of convenience versus commute, or lifestyle versus commute. If you're going into the office 2 days a week instead of 5 days a week, suddenly a longer commute isn't so bad, and a bigger house in a nicer place to live with more room for the kids and closer to the beach or whatever you might want to do becomes more and more relatively attractive. And that's what's happened. I think the thing that none of us know for certain is to what extent will that reset post-pandemic. I'm probably, I guess, I'm a tech guy by background. I personally think we've had a one-way ratchet that's not going to come back very much. I think we've had 20 years of movement towards work from home and remote technologies compressed. It was really compressed into 6 months, right? Like it all happened very quickly. I don't think it's going to go back that much. When we talk to our own team, our own workforce, we've got 100 people working at LongView. We surveyed them and said, when this is all over, how much would you like to work from home or the office or a mix? And 75% of our own team said to us, we'd like a mix. A few days in the office, a few days at home. A small number of people wanted to be in the office the whole time. Either home wasn't good to work or they just liked being in there in the social environment. A small number of people prefer working from home, feel they're more productive. 3/4, that's just our team. But I think those numbers are not unusual. So if that work from home, hybrid work from home lifestyle is a fundamental change, then, I think those populations will continue in those areas. The scale of rises won't continue because presumably more new stock will come there. And then once this group of people's absorbed, it won't have the same impact on prices. But I'm not sure that it's going to go back that much.
Yeah, interesting. And certainly I see that in my surveys because I survey households all the time, that this drift away from this, from the centre of town is a lifestyle-led drift. Okay, it's been COVID catalysed, but actually people quite like it, right? I'm down in regional New South Wales here, and we've seen a lot of people come out from Sydney and are now living in, places that would have been a lot cheaper than they currently are. That means that a lot of locals are displaced. They have to go further out or into other areas. But a lot of the people that I see in the surveys are saying this isn't temporary. This is a permanent shift.
Yeah, that's my view. There'll be some reset. There'll obviously be some employers who demand that people are in the office all the time and whatever. But I think the early evidence is any employer who makes that demand simply loses those employees. So, I think it's largely permanent. So hopefully those markets will reach more equilibrium because it's a huge problem for particularly the local population, many of whom are on lower incomes, who suddenly find themselves, particularly if they're renters, suddenly find themselves displaced or unable to afford it or just literally nowhere to live. So there's a major rental crisis in regional Australia at the moment. It's very troubling.
Absolutely. One of the other questions and potential crisis is interest rates, and this is from Pope Cookie Boy saying interest rate rises this year. If so, how many? And what is the impact of that?
Yeah. Obviously, if I knew the answer to that question, I'd be a multi-million-dollar a year bond trader, right? Not schlepping around in residential real estate, no doubt. But so look, I have some views about what might happen to interest rates. They're no better or worse than the average sort of reasonably well-informed person. I would caution being too derivative of what's happening in the US or elsewhere. The Australian economy is quite a bit different. It's not got the same inflationary pressures as there are in the US. And frankly, it's much better managed. But that being said, the Reserve Bank sort of saying there'll be no interest rate rises till 2024 is looking increasingly heroic and probably unsustainable. So I think there's somewhere in the middle there. I think most commentators believe that there is going to be a degree of interest rate rises, possibly as early as later this year, much more likely sometime in 2023. How big they are, I don't think they'll be very big because, as everyone keeps saying, there's so much debt out there now. You don't need to increase interest rates very much to have the impact that you're desiring to have as a central bank in terms of curbing inflation and demand. So, I see some people saying, interest rates are going to, quadruple or whatever. I think that's absolutely got no chance of happening. You would destroy the entire economy, and I don't think anyone's going to do that. but I think there will be interest rate rises. Then the question is, what's the impact of that on property? And this is where I personally find the debate massively simplistic. And the reason it is because only some properties have a lot of debt on them.
Yep.
And actually about half, Australia now has $9.4 trillion in residential property as an asset class. Roughly half of the value of that has absolutely no debt on it at all. These are people who fully paid off their homes. And so they are precisely completely indifferent to interest rate rises, at least in terms of how it impacts their home and their situation. At the other end of the spectrum, for new home buyers who might have 80 or 85% debt on their homes and often have borrowed as much as they can possibly afford to repay, the risk is that even a modest rise in interest rates will have a material effect on those people and therefore potentially cause more trouble in those sectors of the housing market. But the sort of simplistic analysis, it's pretty widely reported in the media that that there's all this extra debt and therefore the whole property market's going to tank. If you look at the history of interest rate rises for the last 100 years in Australia and you look at the history of property prices, it's not a simple correlation. It's just not, and because there's a whole bunch of factors involved. So, I guess we're doing a lot of work right now to segment the property market and look at which segments of the market are highly exposed to interest rates and which ones are not. And the bulk of them are not.
Yeah, and of course, going back to the debt point, there are a lot of people who have a property and no mortgage at all, right? I mean, it's roughly a rule of thirds, right?
It's roughly a third, but then the properties those people own tend to be more valuable properties, right? So you're up at about 45% of asset value.
Absolutely.
With no debt at all.
Absolutely. Or to turn it around the other way, there is a concentration of debt in a certain segment of households and certain property types, right? Which is, by the way, where my mortgage stress correlates very well, right? So there are very high levels of mortgage stress in some areas, Yeah.
And some of those, if you take the new house and land package areas,
yep,
those are highly interest rate sensitive.
Absolutely right. And
if you take the leafy greens, yeah.
Yep. And that's why the principle of, not averaging and just saying, well, the average is X, that tells you nothing, right? Because of this huge diversity. And, you see it in your data, I see it in my data. You have to go granular to really understand what's going on, because if you try and just average it out, then you blur it all and you don't actually make any sense at all.
Yeah, well, and the other thing that most of the commentary is just misunderstands how property values work. If property values are increasing rapidly, usually what's increasing is actually not so much the debt, but the equity, right? All the increase in value, most of it goes straight onto the balance sheet of the homeowner. Yeah. For everybody who has an existing mortgage, whenever house prices go up, all of that goes straight to their equity, not to their debt. The only people who take on more debt are the people newly buying into the market, who unfortunately, and that's why we have this crisis of affordability, they have to take on more debt, and it's harder and harder for them. But everybody else is actually winning when house prices go up. And it's not driven by debt. It's driven it's not. It doesn't land that way. It goes straight to their equity. So, we've actually had a deleveraging of the asset class through the last 12 months because the total value of the asset class has gone up 20%, and the total value of the debt. That's roughly the value of all the debt on all the housing in Australia, right? Ever. So clearly, most of that hasn't been driven by new debt. Yeah.
And the point there is Saul Eslake made a very interesting submission to the recent inquiry into, housing affordability and all those sorts of things. But, Saul made the point. Well, if you think of it just in pure numbers, right? There are many more people who've benefited from what's been going on just for that mechanism, right? And in fact, the proportion of people who are trying to get into the market is quite small, and even the proportion of people who are actually highly leveraged is quite small as a percentage of the total voters. So it's not surprising that the politicians do what they do and shape the arguments the way they shape them.
And have done for 50 years, right? Like, I mean, Saul's dead right. And just the basic political geometry is always in favour of homeowners, because and so politicians routinely cry crocodile tears about housing affordability, whilst being secretly grateful that the vast majority of their voters are really happy about the increase in the equity value of their home.
Right, but then it does create this disequilibrium between, one end of the other, the haves and the have-nots. And
exactly.
the question is, what are the social consequences of that? And, of course, the total proportion of households who own property, or indeed own property outright, is dropping. So more people have mortgages for longer and a greater proportion rent.
Yeah, look, that's right. And those trends, again, are long-term trends, and absent some fundamental structural changes, those trends will continue. And, what we're seeing, as you well know, you've got a re-emergence of a class system in this country, but it's a bit different to the old class system. The new class system is driven by ownership of property and access to elite education. And those things are increasingly hereditary in both cases. So the families who are highly educated get the high incomes, they get to be able to buy property. That property then goes up, they then pass on that property, through the bank of mum and dad to their kids to buy their own property before they then ultimately end up inheriting from mum and dad. And so the cycle continues. And, it's not easy to think up solutions to that. And most of the government responses to that, as I think you've talked about before, in a sense only make the problem worse. While in the short term they try and help young home buyers get into the market by giving them extra money, you're throwing more money at the same amount of housing, therefore the prices simply go up further. And so most of what governments do allegedly to help fix the problem are actually making it worse as well. And that's what we've seen now for 3 generations.
So the first-time buyer incentives, the traditional approach where you give people a little money, like the homeland packages, what's up, $50,000, $60,000 in WA, first point, homeland packages went up by $50,000, $60,000, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly,
zero.
Which was a straight subsidy again from government to developers.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Yet again, and only made it for the kiddies that come along next year even harder for them to get into the market. Yeah. The price is pushed up further.
And since then, of course, the average cost of that homeland package, because of the fact that it's more expensive to get labour and materials are a lot more expensive, means that suddenly they're finding they're paying a lot more than they thought, and it's taking a lot longer. So the whole proposition basically works against those who've got locked in. So once again, that proposition was there to support the developers. It wasn't there to support, your average first-time buyer, despite the fact, of course, it was all spun by the politicians to we're helping people to get into the market. That really wasn't their main agenda.
Yeah, and so, this is, I think, one of the crushing social questions of our time. There is a generation of people who, if they don't have access to the bank of mum and dad, are going to be locked out, and that is deeply unfair. And I guess we've been doing a lot of thinking about alternative ways to try and change that, that direction that has been set now for 3 generations. And I think there are some. So, we're excited about some of those possibilities because somebody's got to do something, or this thing is really going to break.
So basically there are 2 options, right? Basically you either get to the point where the whole thing collapses on itself and prices drop and affordability comes back to a more normal level, right? Which would be pretty disastrous.
Which no government ever, and I might say no bank ever, right? So you've got the equity markets and the political markets are never going to tolerate that, right? So that is not going to happen.
Yeah. So if that is not the way out, then you've got to find other more creative and innovative approaches to try and actually deal with some of those things. Now, Professor Steve Keen would say, well, that's where we need to have some sort of debt relief program, something which effectively deals with the debt because it's partly driven. Or are there other programs like shared equity programs, something that allows people to basically get into the market and can actually improve the home ownership prospects? Because we can't go on like we're going on, because we're just spiralling down, and we're going to have this bigger gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, so I don't think that there are easy ways to stop housing prices going up, right? Because I don't think there's easy ways to stop land values going up. And I say that, we might jump to the chart I showed you earlier, if we may, Martin. I think it's up.
Okay.
The screen.
Hang on, let's see whether I can bring it up. That one there?
Yeah. So, look, I'm sorry, it's a busy chart, but on the left, for those who can read it, these are the population growth rates, long-term population growth rates of a whole bunch of countries. Greece, Japan, Germany, Russia, Italy, Taiwan, Thailand, China, France, Turkey, UK, Spain, yada, yada, yada. The highest population growth rates by a mile in the world are in Australia, New Zealand and Israel, and have been for 3 generations. So if you have the highest population growth rates in the world, then all other things being equal, more people, same amount of land, price of land goes up, right? And in all the blather that's been going on about shorter term issues and negative gearing and interest rates and all the other things, which are all factors, Australians seem to not be aware of the fact that far and away the biggest driver is, firstly, that we have had for 100 years amongst the highest population growth rates in the world. And secondly, and this is uniquely Australian, which is what these other charts try and show, we have the highest population concentration in the world. 52% of our population live in just 3 urban centres, right? Sydney, Melbourne and southeast Queensland. There's no other country on earth that has that level of population concentration other than, the sort of city-states like Hong Kong or Singapore or Monaco or whatever. So in the US, for example, the top 20 cities in the US only make up, 4 in 10 people live in the top 20 cities in the US. 5 in 10 people in Australia live in the top 3 cities. So basically, if you own well-located land with a solid older dwelling on it in Sydney, Melbourne or southeast Queensland, then these underlying factors will continue to drive up the value of the land underneath that property. And that is what's been going on for 100 years in this country. And so that's the deal. So anyone who thinks they're going to stop property prices going up would have to either stop population growth rates going up, which has been bipartisan policy for generations, or radically change the urban concentration in Australia. And perhaps we're seeing a little bit of that now, and perhaps things like fast trains might impact that. And thirdly, would have to see really bad macroeconomic management. And the truth is, Australia's been one of the best managed macroeconomies in the world, certainly for the last 30 to 35 years. So, so unless any of those things change, the value of urban land and the buildings that are on it, the value of the properties on it are going to keep going up. So I don't think that there's any quick solution that says somehow we're going to bomb property prices. Even if we could, I don't see how you could do it. And even if you could do it, you'd blow up the economy, and if you're in government, you'd lose office. So I don't think the solution's trying to stop property prices going up, broadly speaking. So the only alternative is to try and redistribute the way those increasing property values are owned and who owns them. And this is where, if I can, Martin, this is where I think there's a really potentially transformational opportunity with what are called shared equity schemes. So if we've got a few minutes, I might explain how those work.
No, it'd be good to do that, because of course there are a few around the world that have been tried, and in fact I've looked at a few, and a lot of them haven't really worked at all well. So it will also be interesting to define what we mean by shared equity, and also try and tease out what works and what doesn't work, because we know that they don't always work.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, when we say they don't always work, let me say none of them end badly, right? No one goes broke. Nothing terrible happens. So, but they don't necessarily get much take up. So their impact can be fairly dilute. So let's explain what they are first, and then we'll talk about which ones work and which ones don't, and how you impact that. So about 85% of the young people, mainly young people, who are trying to buy their first home could afford to pay the mortgage on that home. It's not an income issue for them, particularly with interest rates where they are. The problem for, 17 out of 20 young people who can't get into a home is they can't save enough for their deposit. It's the equity side, not the debt side, that is causing them so much grief. It is so hard. You have to save so much money for so long, and by the time you have saved it, the prices of properties have gone up, and therefore the cost of the deposit has gone up, and it keeps getting ahead of you. And that's what's happening to a generation of Australians. And so what shared equity products or services or schemes, whatever you want to call them, do, mechanisms, is have somebody else contribute a portion of that deposit, of the equity that you put in, so that they can just get you over the line and you can get the mortgage and own the home. Now, so long as you buy well and you bought a property that is likely to appreciate, then you've got on the famed property ladder. The value of the mortgage doesn't go up, the value of the house does go up, therefore the value of your equity goes up very rapidly. And so the shared equity is a once-off injection that gets you over the line and gets you into the game. And so that can work very well. So there's a few things that mean it doesn't work as well all the time. So firstly, if you don't buy a property that's likely to appreciate, then you'll get into a property and it's still worth doing, but you won't get the same wealth effect for yourself, right? So and again, a lot of these schemes have been put together by governments or other well-meaning sort of philanthropic or other social housing bodies, really targeting people who are, often quite a long way away from housing affordability without these schemes. But then they tend to be biased towards putting them into new built product because the governments in particular want the construction industry to work. And so that new build product, there's more money in the building, less money in the land, all the more so if it's obviously a new build apartment. So people don't get as much benefit, but they do still get to own their own home. So I still think it's a good thing, but ideally you'd help people buy the right type of property as well. And the second challenge is these things have tended to be focused, because they've been mainly government and philanthropic, at people right at the bottom of housing affordability. And that's, very worthy and appropriate. You obviously want to help the least well off. But they're probably the folks for whom it's always going to be pretty hard for them. They are often the folks who actually will struggle to pay a mortgage as well as struggle to save for a deposit. So ultimately, it's not going to work for them because it doesn't work for them on the income side. So I think that you just need to crawl before you can walk. If we start with shared equity opportunities for people who are earning decent incomes and could pay their mortgage and have already made, decent, what the bankers call genuine savings. They've got a decent amount for a deposit, just not quite enough. You can fast forward them into a house by tipping in the rest of the equity. And I think shared equity schemes that do that for people who are likely to be able to afford to continue to buy the home, and if you gave them help in buying the right home, then you're going to make a big difference. So, spoiler alert, LongView's not yet ready to launch, so you won't find anything on our website about this, but we will be launching a major shared equity offering a bit later this year to do precisely that, to get a generation of younger people over the line. They might have 10 or 12%, they need 20 to get them up to a point where they can pay that deposit, and then and then help them buy the right home, so that it's both good for their, the right home for their family that works for them and is also going to be a good investment. Where I think this becomes transformative, Martin, is if you think about, and this will take a while because I think initially the shared equity investment will probably come from, large-scale investors. But over time, my hope is that ultimately our landlords will actually choose to sell some of their investment properties and invest that money in shared equity alongside their children's generation. And you might ask, well, why would they do that? Apart from it's a nice thing to help these kiddies out. And obviously some of them do that in their own way, in their own family as the bank of mum and dad. But why would people do that to help out other people's kids? Apart from if they were really nice people. And the answer is actually deceptively simple. Because you're participating in the equity value growth of the property, and because the young homeowners who are buying that property usually use more leverage, then so long as the value of the property goes up, the equity returns are actually better than if you bought the exact same property with less leverage. Secondly, if you buy it as an investor, you'll pay land tax. The young homeowners won't pay land tax because it's their principal place of residence. So you would actually get a better return on investment by helping a young couple buy that property as their home and being, if you like, a passive shareholder with them than you would in buying that home yourself as a property investor and then renting it out and having less leverage, more costs and more land tax. So shared equity would actually be a better way for people, for the 2.5 million landlords in this country. They would actually get better returns on investing in shared equity than they would in direct property ownership. Now, everyone's not going to obviously do that tomorrow, and that's okay, but it would be a logical transition for a portion of people to start looking at, they're still investing in bricks and mortar, right? As I say, could be literally the same property. But because of the way the dynamics of the leverage and the land tax work, you will, by definition, get a better return on the exact same underlying asset. And by definition, it's no more risky because it's the same asset. So I think that is the type of mechanism that could actually start to change the outcome, because you could see less people owning investment property in order to help more people buy their own home. Now, okay, they don't own all of their own home, but they're in it now and they're getting the equity growth. And once you're on the train and you're getting that equity growth, then you won't need shared equity for your second home buy, and you won't need as much mortgage because you'll have so much more equity. So, that's I think the most exciting opportunity, because it is a win-win for both the young home buyers and for the property investors. And I just don't see any other mechanisms that have that impact. Everybody else is thinking they're going to play with house prices themselves. And, how's that worked out for the last 80 years?
Not well. No, but that's very interesting, because what it means is that the problem of finding a good tenant goes away, right?
Yeah. Right. And the person who now lives in this home that you own a modest share of, it's their home. They're going to look after it. They're going to pay the mortgage. They're going to do all those things because it's their home. And so, it's a really positive social outcome, and yet it would deliver a better return. So, when I look at, as we talked about earlier, when I look at the capital growth and the wealth creation that many of our landlords have got, they've bought suboptimal properties, and they're paying land tax on them, and they can only get a certain amount of bank gearing. Now, with this mechanism, they could have a share in high-quality properties that are going to get greater capital growth with no land tax and access to higher gearing. They will make a lot more money, by doing good and helping young people to buy their own home. So I know it kind of sounds too good to be true, but I guess we've been working on this for a year, and it's not quite ready yet. It's a very complex thing to put together, but I think that's really exciting, and I think it's a little different perhaps to some of the government schemes, which are very worthy, and I commend them. And the Victorian government launched a shared equity scheme. They put $500 million into it with the hope of helping 3,000 young couples over the next 3 years to get into a home when they couldn't otherwise. And they closed it down after 2 weeks because half the money was gone. Right? $250 million went out the door in 10 business days. That's how much demand there is out there to get that extra amount to get into your deposit. And so I think, but then being a government scheme, then they start putting rules and requirements on it. And if you earn too much money, you have to pay it back, and you can't pay more than this much for a home. And there's a whole bunch of things, which, is appropriate for government money. But I think a private sector shared equity scheme that doesn't have those constraints can potentially help a lot more people, and ultimately create a vehicle where property investors might sell out of their investment properties and sell them to owner-occupiers and put the money into shared equity to help other owner-occupiers.
Yeah, interesting. I can tell you that the comments in the chat have been quite diverse on your proposition, from those saying, "Oh, no," to saying, "Oh, it sounds interesting." I won't put all the individual comments up. Have a look at them later because there's too many. But I mean, one of the things that's come up there in the chat is this question of, can we really allow property prices to go on accelerating? Because this is going to be yet another leg up potentially to property prices. Is there a point where we have got to bite the bullet and say, property prices are just too high relative to income, GDP, whatever you want to look at, right? Now, some people have said, well, I must say in the past, we've already been there for a long time, but it's still going up. So maybe your point is right, that property prices are destined to always continue to rise.
Well, there was an economist called Henry George about 170 years ago, who formed the view that as wealth increased in a society and as population increased, a greater and greater proportion of the balance sheet of that society ends up in the hands of the owners of land. And George and the people who followed him, the Georgists as they're called, have argued, therefore, that you should base the majority of taxation on taxing land and less taxation on productive activity like income and company profits. The Georgists lost that debate 150 years ago, and they've been losing it ever since. We can debate whether that's right or wrong from a public policy point of view, but their analysis, I believe, is correct. The reality is that residential land becomes a bigger and bigger wealth sink the more wealth you have in a society, particularly when population keeps rising. So the idea that there's some natural limit to that is not obvious, and I think the data suggests otherwise. That's why, what does it cost to buy a house in the West End of London? 10 million quid, right? How is that possible? Well, because wealthy people can buy stuff, and the first thing wealthy people want to buy is a good home for themselves. And the more wealth they have, the more they'll outbid each other for that place in Point Piper, right? And it ripples down from there. So the idea that there's a natural limit on this, it's not abundantly clear to me what that limit is. The alternative is the Georgist view that land becomes an ever-increasing wealth sink within the economy.
Absolutely. I mean, there are some really important philosophical points in there, which actually takes you to the nature of society, right, and what we value.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm saying that might be how life works right now. And actually, all the evidence for the last 100 years seems to support.
Indeed. Now, there's a bunch of other questions I just want to...
I hope I've set the cat amongst the pigeons with a few of these things.
No, you have, absolutely. And, that's one of the reasons I wanted you on, because, and I often say to people, on this channel, you won't get just one line of argument. You will get people with different views and different opinions. Yeah. The whole point about this channel is that conflict and that different set of opinions is what I want to encourage.
Well, and we don't have this type of debate elsewhere, right?
No, we don't.
What I will say is, when I started an internet company in 1995, the Fin Review, I think in 1997, published an editorial saying, this internet thing, the internet will turn out to be the CB radio of the 90s. Well, they were wrong. When I was working on electric car charge networks a decade ago, and I said, this is not complicated, the cost of batteries will go down, the cost of gasoline will go up. All cars will be electric. The only question is when. Most people poo-pooed at that idea. That is coming about. So you've got to look at the underlying fundamentals. You don't have to like them or hate them. You just have to accept that they are what they are and work out how you're going to respond to them. And so that, I think, is the challenge. My view is that the underlying fundamentals are what we showed on the screen earlier. Population growth, population concentration, and a well-managed macroeconomy. If that's the case, then residential land continues to go up in value and becomes a bigger and bigger wealth sink. Then the only question we can logically ask ourselves then is, how do we share that wealth around better? How do we get more people into home ownership? And that's where I think shared equity may play a role. Yeah, absolutely. And, again, on this channel, the idea is I want
different ideas out there so that people can actually think for themselves. One of the things I'm very frustrated about in the mainstream is there's almost no real debate about any of these issues, whether it's, the question of what alternatives are. Everybody just follows the herd, follows what the Reserve Bank says, follows what the Treasurer says, right, and just repeats it.
Or just the sort of standard polarised political stuff, right?
Yeah.
The Labor people say you should get rid of negative gearing. The Liberal people say you shouldn't. Mate, I've done the math. It just doesn't make that much difference either way, to be honest.
No.
Like, it's just not a big number. Like, whether you do it or don't do it, and as Shorten, W found out, it's politically toxic beyond belief, and yet it's not actually going to change the answer that much. So, we can keep going back and rehearsing those debates as we have literally for decades on things like that. And I'm not, I have a personal view about it, but it's just not the big answer. Like, it's just not.
Absolutely. Well, we need out of the box thinking, and we need new ideas and fresh ideas, in my view, and that's why I try and encourage on the channel here.
So hit me up with some of the sceptical comments. I'm all for it. Let's have a bit of debate.
Absolutely. Well, before I do that, I just wanted to put this one up. This was from a bit earlier on from Jason, and Jason, thanks very much for the super chat. Commercial property. Any thoughts on what's going to happen to that market segment? How's it going to play out over the next 5 years? And two aspects to that, of course. We know we've got a lot of retail struggling at the moment, particularly with COVID. We know that a lot of the commercial investments have actually not performed anything like as expected. And we know that quite a few super funds are directly leveraged into the commercial sector and not doing very well. And does that potentially going to have a flow over into other sectors of property? What's your read on that?
Yeah, so the first thing I should say is I profess no expertise in commercial property at all. LongView is religiously and solely devoted to residential property. But I have friends who do, so I know a little bit about it, but again, I don't claim any professional expertise. It just seems pretty obvious that a significant number of the major commercial property sectors are potentially facing fundamental challenges. Retail's an obvious one. Stuff's going online. That's not news. The pandemic certainly accelerated it. Offices, people are going to be working from home. It'll take a while for companies to start downsizing their offices, but they will. So the two probably biggest commercial property segments, which is offices and shopping centres, are troubled, I think. By contrast, distribution warehouses and data centres, I'm guessing, are probably going to do pretty well. But again, I'm not the expert. I could imagine they've got some tailwinds in a way that the others have got headwinds. But they're frankly a pretty small part of the commercial property, And again, all the super funds and all the funds managers are all focused on commercial property. None of them are in residential, apart from the 3% of residential, which is new build, because they own shares in, Stockland or Mirvac. But the $9 trillion of existing dwellings, there's no institutional money there at all. It's all in the $1 trillion, so 1/9 as much that's in commercial property, and quite a lot of that is in trouble. So it does beg the question: will those institutional investors at some point determine that actually, if they are going to be exposed to property, which they need to be, that they may need some exposure to residential? And if that is the case, how would that work? And does that create further price pressure on resi if a lot of the commercial sectors are going to go down, but the institutions still want to hold property? I don't know how all that plays out. The way I want it to play out, in the short term at least, is to get the institutions to start contributing to shared equity so that they help us redress the balance of ownership within resi.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting. I've spoken to a few people in the commercial sector because, I've been watching this for some time.
Yeah.
They are really worried. They are really, really worried. But they also have huge amounts of funds they need to invest, to which I replied, well, what about, over there, we've got residential, right? And you don't seem to want to do anything in that sector, right, which I've never understood, really. Right.
Well, so I've been asking that question for a year, right? And I've got a lot of mates in funds management in the big end of town. And some of them give not very frankly, investment grade answers like, oh, I think resi real estate's a bit toppy because interest rates are low. And I'm like, okay, but you're in fixed income, which is 100% interest rate sensitive. So just help me through that. But look, Invitation Homes in the US owns 80,000 single family homes, right? It's a $24 billion fund. American Homes for Rent owns 57,000 homes, single family homes in the US. This is not condos, this is not multifamily dwelling, that's a different sector. There are large-scale residential REITs in the UK and a bunch of other places. So it may well be that at some point the institutions choose to play a role in residential property. Thus far, they've tended not to because they see property as a yield asset class, and the yields are much stronger in commercial property. If they can get their head around resi properties, not so much a yield asset class as a capital growth class, then they may change that view. I think it's kind of weird, frankly, to see a whole massive sector as a single type of play. I mean, if you buy equities, if you're buying shares in, Google or Amazon or Afterpay, you're not buying them for their yield, you're buying them for their capital growth, right? If you're buying shares in Charter Hall or bank hybrids, you're buying them for their yield. Like, it's not complicated. So in property, as it turns out in this country, if you're buying resi, you're normally buying for capital growth. If you're buying commercial, you're normally buying mainly for yield. So the institutions may have to change their mindset if they want to go in resi, but then somebody is going to have to actually be able to do the field work. And this is, I think, the bigger problem that fund managers have when I talk to them. They're like, well, what am I going to do? Stand on street corners on a Saturday morning and buy 80,000 houses? To which I answer, well, probably you won't, but someone will, actually, and that's what companies like Invitation Homes have in fact done. Yeah. So I think the reason why institutional money is not in resi is because it's hard to do. There's lots of prop tech disruptors in residential property and, in property management, companies like Proper and Different and others, and fractional ownership and a whole bunch of things. But I think the thing that we've learned, and hey, I'm a Silicon Valley native, right? I put the first Australian tech company on the NASDAQ. I know a bit about this stuff. Property and data, tech and data analytics is incredibly valuable in property, but you've also got to do the field work. I've said to some of the prop tech disruptors, so tell me, what's the algorithm that you're going to write that is going to help you solve what to do when, God forbid, a tenant passes away in your property? How are you going to solve that from your laptop, right? I mean, we had this happen last week. Unfortunately, it happens, right? And very, very difficult situation. And that's an extreme case. But we all know property happens on the ground. Every property is different. You can't buy it off a computer. You didn't know the gang of bikies or the high voltage power line was next door, right? I mean, you've got to be on the ground. And so I think the challenge for institutional investors is how do they deal with needing large scale presence in the field? Everyone can do the data analytics and the financial engineering. The challenge is you don't have any presence in the field. I do.
Well, and of course,
as it happens.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got large numbers of property managers and large numbers of buyers, advisors, and a data science team. I'm just saying, you can imagine where that might end.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I do a lot of detailed analysis as well, because I actually have exactly the same view that you can't look at averages. You've got to go granular. You've got to understand the local markets, the local properties, all of those things, because if you don't do that, then you can't possibly make the best decisions. And it's very interesting when I talk to individual prospective purchasers or people in the industry, they've sort of gone down this rabbit hole of assuming that those generic indices and those generic metrics are guiding them. And I said, no, you've got to understand, those averages tell you nothing. In fact, they're misleading.
100%, Martin. I mean, I think you and I are completely on the same page here. And that's why we analyse every price of every individual property for 50 years, right? I'm always saying to clients, you don't buy a suburb, you buy a property. I can show you fantastic properties and terrible properties in every suburb in Australia. So, whoever's coming out with this is the hot suburb this week, I mean, yes, some suburbs on average are appreciating faster than others. That's useful to know, and it is useful, and that data is actually pretty easily available. But it doesn't obviate the responsibility to get down to literally the individual property level.
Yep.
And the data's there to do that, as you know, and you're doing that, and we're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. The point is, there is data there. It can be done. It's an attitudinal thing.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a philosophical thing, but it also is very anti the way that the general industry works.
Well, that's right, but who's structuring that industry, right?
Yeah, right. Good question.
Right.
Yep.
Banks happy to work at the suburb average level. Developers love the myth of the suburb average because it allows them to sell rubbish new apartments in so-called hot suburbs and tell people they're going to get great capital growth, right? Sales agents love the myth of the hot suburb because 99% of sales agents are micro-local. They only represent 2 or 3 suburbs. So it's in their interest to say, my suburb's a hot suburb, right? Everybody in that value chain has an interest in perpetuating what you describe, I think, as the problem of averages.
Yeah.
None of them have any incentive to go to the next level and get down to the individual property level, and that's where all the key decisions need to be made.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, just a couple of other questions and comments. I just want to put this one up. Doggy Cam wants some of those equity treats. Now, I assume that might be a Doggy Cam question. So there you go. The Doggy Cam's still there, and the dogs are still asleep. They haven't moved.
Well, they appear to be unmoved by the whole.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I'm afraid that that didn't work. But thanks very much for the super chat. It's greatly appreciated. And the Doggy Cam is it has become a part of the show, right? Because of the.
I can see there's a cult following for Doggy Cam.
Now, one of the questions from a little earlier on, let me see if I can find this, was about tax reform. Is this going to require, if the shared equity thing, is that going to require tax reform, a different way of thinking about the situation, or is it likely that this might prompt tax reform off the back of it?
I'm not sure it'll do anything. It doesn't need tax reform, and I'm not sure it will prompt tax reform.
Okay.
Curiously enough, that's kind of part of the reason, I guess, that we're pursuing it, because it's not either created or encumbered by government. Because anything, look, I did a brief cameo in public life, as you may or may not be aware. Steve Bracks asked me to become part of his government, and I served at his right hand and John Brumby's for a couple of years. So I've been inside the Citadel. I get how government works. And I would rather poke my eye out with a fork than be doing anything which requires changes in government policy to let it happen. So
enough said on that one, I think. Yeah, exactly right. Yes. Once you've seen how the sausage is made,
oh, mate. Yeah, or they're just never made. We're going to have a 20-year debate about negative gearing, and what's actually happened? Absolutely nothing.
No.
Right. For all the heat, light, and sound, nothing's happened. Nothing's changed. Nothing's got better or worse. Right. I mean, all the trends we talked about have got worse. And so, I'm not saying it's a proper policy debate, but we get stuck in, so many issues in Australia. People start the debate with the government order, Yes. To which my usual response is, well, the government ain't gonna. Whether they order or not, they just ain't gonna. Right. So let's stop waiting for the government to fix everything and do the things that we can change.
Absolutely. Well, there is something about Australia that sort of looks over there to say, come on, government, fix my problem, fix this, fix that, right? I actually think that is one of the most destructive attitudes, because, while there is a place for a certain degree of government to do certain things, the more you try and throw over the fence and say it's their problem, the more you walk away from trying to actually make things happen. And that's what I think we need more of that rather than less of it.
Look, I agree. And, I've been a participant in the political process. I'm not having a go at government or at politicians. I'm actually very sympathetic to where they are. It's just, it is so hard in the modern political and media context for governments to do anything much different, right? I mean, the big reforms are now 30 years old.
Yes.
So I'm not having a go at either politics. It's just the system's ground to a halt. And, that's why I ended up back in Silicon Valley, right? I mean, if you want to change things, you go to tech and you go to social movements. You don't go. Government's an engine for the status quo, not an engine for change.
Yep, absolutely. The bias is definitely to continue to do what you've always done, and the amount of effort that's required to push it just slightly in any particular direction is huge.
And somebody's going to oppose you, and exactly,
Yeah.
And the general inertia of a massive bureaucracy. So, yeah.
Now, there was this question from earlier on. You may have answered it, but let me just put it up. Vanessa said, so what is shared equity in property? And just to be clear, what we're saying is that there is somebody basically who has a proportion of the property and enjoys effectively the potential growth, but what you're doing is helping somebody else buy the property.
Yeah, and so the shared equity provider then gets a proportionate share of the growth, only a proportionate share. Well, I've seen schemes that do otherwise. I think they're very unfair, but sensibly, if you put up a certain portion of the money, you should get a certain portion of the growth, right? Perhaps I can illustrate for people. Let's take a simple example. Let's imagine, just for the sake of simple round numbers, that that we can help a young couple buy a property that happens to cost $1 million. Okay, so they should have a deposit of $200,000, and then the bank will lend them $800,000. Let's leave lenders' mortgage insurance and stuff out for a second. We can come back to that. Okay, well, what if they don't got $200,000? What if they've got $150,000? Okay. Well, then, if the shared equity provider can tip in the last 50, and that young family can otherwise meet the cost of the mortgage for the 80, then they get in, and they get in now, and they get the value of the house now, and then they get the benefit of the value of the house going up rather than the disadvantage of the value of the house going up when they're not owners. So effectively, 3/4 of the equity has come from them. They've put in 150 of their own, and 50 of the equity, or 1/4, has come in from the shared equity provider. So a logical outcome of that when the house is sold is that 3/4 of the uplift in value would go to the homeowner, and 1/4 would go to the shared equity provider. So they both get exactly the same outcome. And of course, if the home was sold for less than what it was bought for, heaven forbid, if you bought the wrong property, then in my view, the shared equity provider should lose money proportionate, just as the homeowner loses money. You really should be completely arm in arm with the shared equity provider and the homeowner so that they are completely aligned. And then you'll have some confidence that whoever's providing the shared equity has an incentive to actually do the right thing and help ensure that actually a good property is bought that is going to increase in value for everybody's benefit.
Absolutely. And it is interesting that other countries around the world are also experimenting with these sorts of schemes too. The UK, for example, had one which sort of worked, although in some cases people got stuck with the property they couldn't then move out on from because the value didn't go up. But that's
exactly because they gave the money, but they didn't give the buying advice.
Correct.
Yes. and so often the money was more targeted towards new build. So that's been, as I say, the two flaws with the shared equity schemes have been either that they don't give any buyer's advice, or worse, that they push people towards new build product, which tends to have poorer capital growth. And secondly, that a lot of the government philanthropic schemes, and this is not a criticism at all, but they've tended to focus on the folks who are furthest away from home affordability. And unfortunately, a large proportion of those people aren't just short of the deposit, they can't pay the mortgage. And so the shared equity would only be solving half your problem then. And so those schemes tended not to have much impact.
And the point there is it's important to understand what part of the puzzle shared equity does solve.
Yeah.
It doesn't solve that you've got to buy the right property in the first place, right? Which is
absolutely
the critical point, which is where we came into this conversation, right?
Yeah.
Which is that when you make a buying decision, right, you can buy a good property or a bad property, a dog or a star, but if you buy a dog, it's still a dog, even under the shared equity model, right?
100%. Couldn't agree more. And that's why we're building a large buyer's advisor team and a data science team, because you've got to help people buy the right home.
Absolutely. Now, this one came in a little while ago from Smooth. And happy birthday, Helen Fosdale, ADU, who turned 63 in Stroud, London on the 16th of January 2022. So, Smooth, thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate that. And I did say that I would make sure that was up and there on the screen. So there it is, Smooth. I hope that's okay.
I once went to a test, the fourth test in Jamaica in 1995, and a mate of mine was running in an election back home, and so I unfurled a banner in Sabina Park, Kingston, Jamaica, and tried to get his campaign on national television from far away. So I think Smooth's adopting the same principle here.
Absolutely right. Oh dear! And people love the doggy cam. You see, it's definitely the those dogs don't move. Said Luke. Oh, they did. They just moved in their sleep. Yeah. At this time of night, they're just sort of, just quietly thinking about chasing rabbits or something, right? You should.
I'm wondering if some people are wondering if these are alleged dogs.
Alleged dogs? Oh, no, they have been.
I mean, are they actual real dogs?
Yeah,
I guess. But for the fervent cult followers, they've seen these dogs move. So I'm a newbie to this.
Yeah, no, they have seen them visit and make a lot of noise. So it's just that this time of night now they're sort of a bit sleepy as they
they've been well fed.
Yeah, well, they've been well fed and well walked even on a wet day. Well, look, we're in the sort of the last 10 minutes of the show.
Yep.
There are a couple of other thematics that I just wanted to explore. Yeah. One is. You're in tech. What's the correlation or connection between the bitcoins and crypto and property? Is there a connection, or do you see them as completely different domains?
Boy, look, I've got a couple of mates who are like really heavy-duty, serious players in the crypto world, and I confess that I'm not. There's a lot of talk about the tokenization somehow of property. That there's going to be ways of transacting ownership of property through the blockchain and through various forms of cryptocurrency. I don't have a problem with that as an idea. I don't think that, you're using a different currency, it's the same asset. So I don't think that's fundamentally a problematic idea. And that may well happen, just as crypto may turn out to be used to buy various other things. I mean, it just goes to the validity of crypto as a currency. So I don't think that they're particularly related either way. I know part of what's happening is that young people desperate to save for that deposit and feel that it's getting away from them are investing in crypto in the hope that they'll get a very rapid return on that crypto and then be able to use that to buy to get the deposit and buy the home. I hope that works out for them. It's just very volatile, and it just worries me that if you got all your money on number 37 on the roulette wheel and you don't really understand how it works, it could end badly. But I know some young folks who've made a ton of money in crypto and are using that to buy. So I get it, but like any form of high risk, as you know, Martin. Investing is all about, the correlation between risk and return, and most of the cryptos are highly volatile, so they have the potential for very high returns. They also have the potential for very high risk. And,
So I think it made a couple of interesting points. The first is the idea of property settlements on the blockchain, right?
Yeah.
That probably will come because you could take a lot of pain and cost out of the conveyancing system, right?
Yeah.
So that seems to me to be a very interesting one. The second, the idea of tokenization. So in other words, the atomization of property, so you can own bits of multiple properties. That would be a potential natural correlation. It's already happening with purple bricks and what have you. That you can actually own bits of property.
Yeah,
is that good or bad? I'm not sure.
People have been talking fractional property ownership for a long time. It probably can happen. It's just not. I just don't think it's the main game. I think large-scale residential real estate investment trusts will happen, and then you can buy shares in that trust, and you will therefore own a small proportion of a large number of properties. I'm not sure that you need to own an exact proportion of an individual property to feel that way. I'm not sure that it gives you much benefit. So. I think that'll happen just through garden variety REIT structures, just like anyone who invests in a commercial REIT owns a tiny bit of this factory and a tiny bit of that factory and a tiny bit of that shopping centre and a tiny bit of that office building. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, just answering Jason's question, smart contracts, yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely an opportunity there. The technology exists, the structures exist.
I think let's separate the blockchain from crypto for a second. I mean, the blockchain is going to secure all of those transactions at some point. I think it's unarguable. Whether you go through the currency mechanism of some particular type of tokenization, I'm sure that will happen at some levels and in some spaces. Whether it becomes widespread, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure what problem it solves. You know, I always have this debate with my tech mates. It's like, wow, that's really interesting, but what problem are you solving by doing that? And if the answer is, well, nothing in particular, then why do you think it's going to happen?
Yeah. Next question I wanted to touch on briefly was, we've got an intergenerational wealth question, right? Because we've got a lot of older people with huge amounts of property, huge amounts of mortgage-free property, but there is going to be an intergenerational shift as that money effectively, comes down one way or the other to the next generation. So I'm interested in the relationship between the up and coming and the people coming down, and whether you think that's going to have an impact on the property market over the next 2 to 5 years.
Yeah, well, as I say, I think what we have is not just an intergenerational equity problem, right? We have an equity problem between the haves and the have-nots, and the haves become intergenerational and the have-nots become intergenerational. So the families that own property then pass on that property or the wealth from that property to their children, and it goes on. And the families that haven't had that opportunity have nothing to pass on. And so that I think is the dynamic we're really trying to solve. It's not just that the older generation's got all the money, because families are families, they will pass that on, but they'll only pass it on to their family. And that's why we think shared equity is the alternative to the bank of mum and dad for the people that don't have a bank of mum and dad.
Well, I cover the bank of mum and dad regularly in my research.
Mate, we've all done it, right? Like you and me and all of our friends in our generation have been fortunate enough to be property owners and then typically are helping our kids buy their property. What happens to the kids who don't have someone who can do that for them?
No. There was a couple of questions earlier on, which I just want to get your opinion on before we close. And that is just a broader perspective, right? The China's connection, right, to property. Because we know that there was a time when a lot of people from China were buying property here in Australia. It seems to be a bit on the turn now. We also know that it's harder now for money to get out of China. And we also know that the Chinese economy is slowing. The latest growth numbers were significantly down from where they're previously. Is that something which you reflect on in terms of as you develop conversations with people, or is the China problem basically not one that keeps you awake at night, as it were?
Look, it was definitely material, and to some extent still is, in a number of segments of the property market. I mean, as you'd be aware, for better or worse, often new build apartments, a lot of those were bought by offshore buyers, including a large number from mainland China. For better or worse, unfortunately, I don't think they'll get a very good investment, but they got their money out of China, so that might be worth it to them. But we also see in residential, there are particular suburbs, in particularly Sydney and Melbourne, that had periods, particularly around sort of 2015 through 2017, where there were significant numbers of offshore buyers, particularly from China, that were significantly inflating the prices of those suburbs. And that was a material factor. You talked to any of the sales agents in those locations, and that was clear. Again, they tended to like new build product. So even if it was, in an established area, a Kew or Camberwell in Melbourne, or parts of the eastern suburbs of Sydney, those buyers tended to want to buy new build product. That just seemed to be what appealed to people. And there's clearly a lot less of that now. Look, I'm not the foreign policy expert, but I don't think it's breaking news to say that Australia and China are not getting along as well as we used to. And so I think it's highly likely that neither the Chinese government nor the Australian government is going to be very excited about a large increase in that. That having been said, quite a lot of the money that's come out of China is from folks who are not fans of their own government and want to get their money out from under. And that's why it's come here. So, look, I'm not the expert on how that's going to play out, and I'm certainly not the expert on how the Foreign Investment Review Board or the Chinese government restrictions on money exiting the country, how all those trends are going to play out. I do think it's a material factor, and it has been a material factor in certain segments of the property market. And it's less so now. Whether that comes back because of changes within China or changes in the Australia-China relationship, I don't know. On current trends, that relationship's heading south, not north. So, that's a bit of a wild card.
Jason asks again. Jason, thanks for the super chat. Do your surveys show many banker mum and dad investors who fall into trouble that they guaranteed a loan and lent kids money and their kids defaulted, leading to their primary place of reference being taken by the banks? Well, actually, a lot of the banker mum and dad people don't stand as guarantor anymore because they've basically got scared by the stories of the people being caught. Right, what they do is to hand money across directly or indirectly, so it's a loan rather than actually a guarantee.
Right, but then they can't call it a loan because if they call it a loan, then the bank won't give their loan. Right. So then they've got to say it's a gift, but then they have a secret loan agreement hidden away because actually if that bastard ever divorces my daughter and goes off with his secretary, I don't want him getting one red dime of my money, right? That's a lot of what's going on in the banker mum and dad.
Spot on. And I see that in my surveys, exactly.
And like we've all had those conversations and we all know about those. I think the banker mum and dad is pretty problematic for a whole bunch of reasons. Things can go wrong with all of that stuff. I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but in my ideal world, mum and dad would tip the money into a shared equity scheme. The shared equity scheme would give the money to the kids, and you wouldn't have all of that non-transparency, and you wouldn't have any of those legal or family dynamics issues. It could just be a purely commercial arrangement, but we'll see if that happens.
Absolutely. Well, certainly the bank mum and dad, I think, is very problematical. The fact that a large proportion of first-time buyers rely on it, it makes the wealth inequality worse. It creates a whole bunch of intergenerational tensions, and as you say, what happens if ultimately, the relationship breaks up or something, or indeed, if in fact prices don't go on up and suddenly the parents discover that the equity that they thought they had, they don't have, right? I mean, it just...
Right, yes, and again, God forbid, if the kiddies didn't buy the right home.
Exactly right.
It all comes back to buying well.
Okay, and that was going to be effectively where I wanted to bring the conversation to. Last comment, right, that the one I want to underscore, you got to buy well, right? So what are the sort of the 2 or 3 really important things to think about to ensure that you do buy well?
I'll give it to you in a sentence. Buy solid older dwellings on well-located pieces of land. If you feel that you can't afford a solid older dwelling on a well-located piece of land in your favourite suburb, then go further out along the train corridors and get to a place where you can. Even if that solid older dwelling is a villa unit, you'll still have a high land component. So rather than buying the new build 2-bedroom apartment in Brunswick for $700,000, I'm sorry, I'm using Melbourne geography just because I'm more familiar with this market. Buy the 20-year-old villa unit 5 minutes walk from Ferntree Gully Station, and your rate of capital growth will be much, much higher.
Wonderful. Well, I want to say thank you very much for sharing your thoughts this evening. I mean, really interesting conversation. In the chat, some agreed, some disagreed. But that's the whole point, right? That's why we do what we do. So that's and I really appreciate your coming on. If people want to find out more about LongView, where do they go? LongView.com.au. Property's a long game, and I think my address is up there on the screen, evan.thornley@longview.com.au. I'll always return questions from folks who want to talk about property. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts this evening. Really enjoyed speaking with you, and we must do it again sometime. Lovely. Thanks, Martin. Really terrific to talk. And I don't know how the banks and developers and sales agents got off so lightly. We didn't give them more than 5 minutes of curry tonight. But well, it sounds like there's another show there where we should actually go full on. But there we are. We should do some naming and shaming. The stuff that you see, it really is heartbreaking. I know. Well, both you and I actually have a whole bunch of case studies, right, from people really we know, and perhaps we should do a war stories show sometime. Yeah. But not tonight. We've run out of time. Thank you very much. Take care. And I'm going to take you take you offline now, and I'll close out the show. Thank you. So there you are, folks. Hope that you found that interesting. I've really enjoyed speaking with Evan, and very interesting comments there. I will just check the doggy cams. They're still asleep. There you go. I don't think they've moved. They're not stuffed. They are real, honest. But there you go. So I want to say thank you very much for sharing your time with me this evening. And just to say that next week I've got another show with Steve Keen and Victor Klein on. We're going to be talking with them about some of their policies. Steve Keen has come out with a new housing policy, for example, and there are some other ones there. So that'll be an interesting show. So mark your diaries and join us next week. I want to say thank you very much for spending some time with us this evening, and have a good week. And we'll catch you again same time next week or on the recorded shows in the week. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, signing off. See you later.